Welcome, everyone, to the Culture Encounters podcast. I'm your host, Chad Ownby. As a reminder, we are the Culture Encounters podcast representing the Culture Encounters nonprofit out of Richmond, Virginia. And our mission is to ignite cultural curiosity, knowledge, and appreciation in our region through the transformative powers of the arts, shared experiences, and open dialogue while serving as a model for global harmony. That message is still true and as true as ever in our ever-changing world. So it's great to be here again with you all this evening. Thank you for tuning into the show. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for supporting Culture Encounters. So again, I am Chad Ownby. I am your host. I have been with Culture Encounters since the beginning. I am a teacher. I am an educator. I am mostly, first and foremost, just a intellectually curious human being. I like to learn. I like to expand my horizons. I like to grow as a person in whatever possible capability that I can, in any possible way that I can. And this podcast is kind of a way to help me do that. So thank you for helping me, I guess, help myself in this case. And hopefully through that, providing the opportunity for people to be connected or feel connected. To cultures other than their own, and hopefully expand their horizons as well. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. For the first time ever on the show, I have my brother, Stephen Ownby. He's going to be on the show today. We're going to discuss things punk and metal as far as the music genre goes. Those of you that have followed the podcast for a while know that we talk about music every once in a while, because music is similar to food. Music is very much the gateway into someone's culture, and it can tell you a lot about a person if they share their musical taste with you. So we're going to discuss the culture that surrounds the punk rock and heavy metal community, and we're also going to discuss how those two communities, while accepting, have struggled in the past with always being accepting for other cultures, and how that has been rectified and what work still needs to be done. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him in now. Again, this is my brother, Stephen. What's going on, man? How are ya?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well, Chad. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I know you got to be exhausted. Long day, new parent.
Yeah, it's a thing.
I can't even imagine. Lydia, your daughter, has she been listening to? Has she been enjoying any interest, any specific bands or artists or anything that she has responded to in a very organic, infant-like way?
She seems to like anything with Dave Grohl, be it Nirvana or Foo Fighters. She likes Rage Against the Machine, and she really likes death metal.
I'm here for it. What about baby metal? Have you played her baby metal yet?
That seems like something really obvious that I should do, but I have not.
Man, we should do that and then just like tweet baby metal and be like, hey, I'm sure somebody's probably done that.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's kind of delve into it a little bit. I know your story, but other people might not. So Stephen is a big, vocal proponent of both the punk and metal communities. I know that music has played a big part of your life, whether it's your own identity or just your mental health as well. And I'm sure we'll discuss all of that. But let's start kind of. I think a good place to start is. When do you first remember listening to let's start with metal first. When do you first remember listening to metal music and being cognitively aware that, oh, I'm listening to heavy metal right now and I'm liking it?
Well, growing up, our parents, particularly our mom, she listened to AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Def Leppard. And then around 12, 13, 14, I got into Well, first it was Creed when they were really popular.
Yeah.
And then came the Nickelbacks and the Three Doors Downs, the sort of hard rock stuff. But the first band that I really think leaned more into the metal side, and I would catch flack from some for calling them metal, but new metal is a subgenre of metal. Linkin Park was the big one.
And that's interesting, and that I think we're going to bring that up later on. When you mentioned new metal, new metal is very much, for those that don't know, it's a fusion genre at its core. And we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about the dichotomy of acceptance versus not acceptance with metal. I remember those days. So Linkin Park, I remember coming back into the back hallway of your room. And you would have the Hybrid Theory album playing, and we would listen to it. What do you think it was about that album that spoke to you? Was it Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda's lyrics? Was it the aggressiveness of the music? What really spoke to you as a 13, 14-year-old living in suburbia?
I think Linkin Park hit me at exactly the right time, where everybody's got that, rebellion against mom and dad thing.
Right.
But I think it went deeper because of some of the stuff that our parents being divorced multiple times, and our not so great relationship with our dad and stepmom. I think Linkin Park, through Chester's lyrics, really spoke to that sort of trapped and angsty feeling. And then it's really remarkable looking back at that album now as an adult, because the lyrics don't feel dated and juvenile, because I think this is part of Chester's genius. Like, they felt super relatable to a 13-year-old angsty teen mad at his dad, but they also feel super relatable to somebody who's got, interpersonal stuff in his adult life with friends, with coworkers, with bosses. Like, I don't know, there's something really brilliant about the universality of Chester's lyrics, I think.
Sure, I agree with that, and I think that's why he, so many mourned his passing, back in 2017. Myself included. Now, because again, he very much, there was a lot of honesty in that album, I think. And so I remember Linkin Park, and then from there on, you got into heavier music after that a little bit. More traditional heavier music, but we could go down a rabbit hole of the subgenres of metal. But when did you, around the same time, before we get to that next question, if you didn't have the Hybrid Theory record from Linkin Park playing, you probably had the All Killer No Filler album from Sum 41 playing. So around that same time, was it around that same time you got into punk? And what drew you into punk? Because you're really cool in that you refuse to be like, no, I'm not going to listen to punk because I listen to metal, or I'm not going to listen to metal because I listen to punk. Depending on the day, like, you equally and in different ways identify with both communities and subgenres. So what was it? When do you remember being aware that punk rock was a thing? And what ultimately started drawing you into punk bands?
Well, I think the very first punk that I remember hearing, and it was definitely on the pop punk side, was Blink-182 when All the Small Things came out.
Yeah,
and it was everywhere. And then a couple years later, that All Killer No Filler album, the song Fat Lip by Sum 41 was on one of the Tony Hawk.
that was huge. Tony Hawk's soundtrack was a game changer. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, like, we were talking about that the other day. Like, that was a big deal.
The All Killer No Filler lyrics resonated with me because they had very much, and this is where I think I go against some of the stereotypes of what punk rock is. To me, it was never about, it's not a phase, mom, rebellion against my parents.
Right,
To
right.
me, it was the us versus them ethic
Yeah.
of punk rock, because the message of that Sum 41 song, Fat Lip, is we're losers, we're weird, we're different, and we love it. And as living where we did, a very affluent area at the time before moving to a much less affluent area, um, we were both subjected to a lot of bullying.
Yeah.
And I think the us versus them, it's okay if they don't accept you, we accept you, no matter who you are. Weird hair, piercings, tattoos, that really appealed to me. And I remember reading online, um, about the punks versus the preps, and
Yeah.
in reading about the preps, I saw the kids who were mean to me, and so I was like, well, I guess I'll gravitate towards this other thing, where
Right. Yeah. Sure.
it's all about defying that, and being who you are. And we can joke about, like, are you really a nonconformist if you're just dyeing your hair just to look just like your friends? But
Right.
that was more like just finding,
Your people.
yeah. And that it really started with that Sum 41 record, and then after we moved and I made friends with a much more diverse crowd of people, um, because when we lived in the more affluent area, I never felt like the alternative kids were as sincere.
Sure. Right.
I felt like a lot of it was that, like, this is our fashion, this is our trend. But when I moved and I met people who were in bands and were putting on their own shows, and I got introduced to more bands, and I got really into more of the pop punk bands, the Green Days and the Blink-182s, and then the emo came out with My Chemical Romance and the Used, and then I found, some of the older punk bands, Bad Religion, the Ramones, Sex Pistols.
Right.
Um, it was those bands that it was all like, it was like sort of a family vibe. Like, it's okay, we're all weird, we're all losers, we'll accept you,
For
it
sure.
doesn't matter. And then, like, I could go on and on about this, and then, like, the politics came into it, and it affected
Right.
my political beliefs. And I think, um yeah, the punk rock really, I think, shaped me. And
So
um
yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. Do you think you were drawn to? It's kind of like a chicken egg thing. Like, do you think you were drawn to those messages because of who you already were, or do you think that those messages kind of shaped you, like, and kind of shaped like your ideologies, or a little bit of both?
I definitely think it was both. I think being bullied and darker moments of our adolescence,
Right.
and I think all of those things made me more empathetic and willing to identify with people who were, you know pushed to the margins. And obviously there's no comparison between being a middle class white kid and, a racial minority or a sexual or gender minority.
Right.
But I do think it made me more empathetic towards the plights of those people. So hearing those messages of defiance and unity in the punk and emo music, um, I think I was certainly more receptive to it because of what I had been through. And at the same time,
Sure.
you got to remember what was going on in the world, like the Bush years,
Oh God. Yeah. I try not
um,
to.
the
Right.
the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
Seeing people not that much older than me going off to war for
Yeah.
a cause that I certainly didn't believe in. I don't think most of America believed in it
No.
by that point.
Based on
And
a lie, like based on a blatant lie.
Yeah, I didn't know how.
I mean,
how
that I'm not even getting political with that one as much as like that's
yeah,
just been proven at this point, like that those documents were false.
and
So a lot of mistrust and like everything. Um, but on that note, so you kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I kind of want to go back to it. Talking about the culture, when we say culture around or a community around punk rock and heavy metal too, um, what we're specifically referencing is going to shows, representing merchandise of the band, not at the show you're going to see because apparently that's some weird unwritten rule, but like when were you? Do you remember like when you were aware of it's not just me who's really into these bands and really identify with their messaging? Like when do you remember realizing wait this is like a thing where like people go to shows and follow these artists and are like a part of something that is not just them, like because that's really what culture is being a part of something, and making the active choice to be a part of that. So do you remember a time? I remember when it was for me, but do you remember a time when you were like, okay, this is there is more than just, it's not just music, like this is a whole community around me if I want to be a part of it?
um, I have like two answers to that. The
Yeah,
first
sure.
one is when we moved to Chester, and
Right.
the people I started hanging out with, um, and even though I still felt like not cool enough for some of them sometimes,
Sure.
and but the people I started hanging out with were in bands.
Yeah.
I made really good friends with people who were in bands, who played at small shows, and knew older kids and adults who were in bands. And so yeah, I definitely realized it then that like this was sort of a culture that created itself, and
Hmm.
perpetuated itself. And the at our high school, the the punk kids, the metalheads, they all hung out together.
Yeah.
There was sort of like a unified alternative crowd that like you'd have a guy in a death metal band best friends with a guy in a pop punk band, and they would hang out on the weekends at a ska show. And
Hmm.
like there would be all sorts of posturing about what was real metal or real punk, but it was
Right.
all like sort of within this community.
Sure.
Um, the community could be very welcoming, but also very insular.
As like a defense mechanism, the unintended consequence, right? Like we intend to, we want to be supportive, but at the same time, this is our safe space, so we're not gonna, necessarily.
That, and I also think I don't want to just badmouth where we grew up, but I think there is a lot of there's a lot of racism in
Absolutely.
Chester, and it didn't, the punk scene didn't dodge it. I remember having to chastise my friends for racist jokes and
Yeah,
stuff of that nature. But it's also where I met my first people of color who were into punk rock and heavy metal.
for sure.
And
And I know yeah, absolutely.
um, sorry, I got off topic
No,
there.
yeah, you're good. You're good.
The
We do
the
that all
other the other
the time.
moment that I sort of remember realizing that there was this community, um, beyond, because there's the difference between a concert and a show, right?
For
Like
sure. Right.
a concert,
Explain that for people that don't know.
going to a concert, that's going to see a nationally, internationally known band that is super famous, and you're in the crowd, you're there to see a show. And I've been to a ton of those for lots of different subgenres, metal and punk, um, and classic rock and all sorts of stuff. But a show is it a small club or a community center or somebody's basement, and that is for like that's a band that is kids that are just starting, or a band that has stayed underground through just never catching on nationally, or intentionally staying underground.
Right. We
And those
did. There was.
shows
Yeah.
like those shows like you're out there moshing with the other bands who are going to go on later in the show, or the guy up on stage, like you saw earlier that day in English class.
Yeah.
And so a show, it's a much more DIY experience. It's much more down to earth. It's accessible, but it feels like this secret little fun thing that like it's you and your friends and the band against the world. And
Yeah.
it's very different than being in an arena with 50,000 people, screaming your head off.
No, I remember.
But both equally great experiences. I love them both to death.
Sure.
But I'd say the moment I realized that world sort of existed, it was way before I ever encountered it, and it was reading a book. It was reading the autobiography of the professional wrestler Lita.
Yeah.
She talked a lot about coming up as a teenager and an adult.
Very similar to us. Yeah. Very
punk
similar.
rock scene.
Yeah.
And she was, had a little more street cred than us, probably, dumpster diving and a little more on the crust punk side.
Right.
But she would talk about this secret little world that she found with the band 7 Seconds, who I found much later. I actually listen to their music and love it, and they have an incredibly positive message, and I encourage everybody to give them a listen. But
and that's a misconception, really quick, sorry to cut you off. Like, people have this misconception about, especially in metal, but punk too, that it's about anger and destruction and chaos. But like, no, these messages and these, especially if you're there with the bands, is all about inclusion and unity. Especially for those that need a place to belong or might just be going through a rough time. Like, especially there's a whole like subgenre of punk rock, specifically the Interrupters. Like, they're incredibly positive. Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah.
Okay, so to explain it in those terms for people who aren't a part of those communities, like, it's Maslow. If people need it, it's fulfilling a need. These communities are fulfilling a need for people, beyond just like, oh, I like this music, just like any real art does, right? Art fulfills a need, and a relatively high need on Maslow's hierarchy. So that's what these communities do. They are an extension of the art of the musician, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And like, I think it varies from artist to artist and band to band and
sure, yeah,
subgenre to subgenre. I think I certainly like a lot of punk rock that is very concerned with trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And trying to build community and trying to speak up for the disenfranchised. Yes, it is angry music, but it's angry because how could you not be?
Absolutely.
But and then
yeah,
I'm sorry, you get into like the emo subgenre, and I think that it's angry music and it's sad music, but it's there as a way for the listener to feel like they're not alone. And
right, yeah.
My Chemical Romance, a big example of that, and they're almost a punchline because they're such the example of the genre. Right. But like,
I have used them as a punchline.
Much like Linkin Park, yes. I find that their lyrics like have not lost any resonance with me in the 20 years that I've been listening to them. Like, from being an angsty sad teen to being angsty sad.
Right. And we're not at all saying, this next statement is disclaimer, I'm not saying that music should replace mental health treatment, because it if you need mental health treatment, or even if you don't think you do, I highly support those who choose to go to therapy, because mental health matters. But it's cathartic, right? It is a cathartic experience. We have one of our favorite bands, Machine Head, has an album called Catharsis for that reason, and their lyrics at times are blisteringly angry. But they have one song specifically. Talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about the experience of hearing the song "Darkness Within" by Machine Head live, and kind of what that experience is.
Yeah, you and I have seen them play that live twice now, and Machine Head, while they're very progressive politically for that generation of metal bands. I think they maybe don't cast a critical eye at some of their friends who are unfortunately no longer with us that are not so great politically. But
I believe you're talking about Pantera.
yes,
Yes.
however, we saw them the first time shortly after the events of Charlottesville, after Trump was elected, and Rob Flynn, the lead singer, had a speech about Charlottesville and about how hard it had been just seeing the state of the country and the world. And he went into this song "Darkness Within," which is all about him dealing with his depression and how music is his solace from his own mental health issues, and
Right.
really his only true religion. And that song just really resonates with me, as a fan of the music, as an atheist.
Right.
So like I'm there surrounded by hairy, sweaty dudes, just tears streaming down my face, and then
you weren't alone. There were a lot of us were like, and that I think that says what, and I think that encapsulates what a show or even I mean, they kind of bridge that gap a little bit, but that is what these communities are like. The idea of somebody performing art and you being there with complete strangers, lots of them very sweaty, and to be moved to tears multiple times. There have been 2 times when that same song, a similar speech at the second show, more referencing his mental health, to be moved to tears. I'm tearing up just talking about it now. Like that's what it is. It's what it truly is that togetherness and that release, that catharsis, is an incredibly powerful thing.